So this morning's lessons, Pastor Matt got to make a choice. Now I know you're thinking, doesn't he always get to make a choice? The answer is we like to follow the lectionary. And I haven't mentioned that recently, but why? We have this 3-year cycle of readings, and why doesn't Pastor Matt do some cool sermon series and just ditch the lectionary? Because if that happened, we would spend all our time talking about Pastor Matt's favorite Bible verses. And I have to tell you, Pastor Matt's favorite Bible verses are a lot fewer than, say, the Bible. And so it's good for us to wrestle with them, but today I did get a choice. There was an alternate gospel text, and I chose the road less traveled. The reason I chose today's text instead of the main reading assigned for today is because, like the first reading where we hear about Lydia and her encounter with Paul on the Sabbath, we also hear that word Sabbath in the gospel text. And I want to walk you through this story kind of step by step. Jesus is from a rural community well to the north of Jerusalem. He has come to Jerusalem with his disciples to observe a Jewish festival. And so there they are, bright lights of the big city, right? Some of you remember from years ago that movie Hoosiers, and they make it to the finals, right? And these kids from this tiny town in rural Indiana show up in Indianapolis at the huge arena, and they're just awestruck because they've only seen like grain elevators previously that were that big, right? And so they're excited. So this is Jesus and his disciples. They're near the sheep gate, and there is this pool there, a pool. This pool of water, not a swimming pool, but a pool of water. It's called Beth Zatha. And this pool of water is caused by a spring that is there. And we can imagine that at times the spring might be more vigorous than others. We hear in the text about the water being stirred up and that it's not always stirred up. So people are waiting there for that to happen, not unlike being at Yellowstone perhaps and waiting for a geyser because it's going to happen at some point. But the tradition is that if you are ill, if you are lame, if you are blind, and when the water is stirred up, if you are able to get into the water, that God will heal you and you will be made well. So we have all of these people here, right? But there's one guy who's been there maybe longer than others. He can't walk or can't walk well. He's been there for 38 years. 38 years. Now, I know there are people here this morning who have some sense of what it means to wrestle with a long-term health issue. Many of us know what it means to wrestle with a short-term health issue and often look back and think, how did I get through that place? How did I make it? We think of what the resources are that are necessary to support the person who is ill or disabled and those who care for them. This is way before Social Security disability. This is way before the Americans with Disabilities Act that would have made sure there was a ramp into the pool, right? This is way before. In 38 years. Think of the family, the friends, the neighbors that all would have been pitching in, and the weariness that would have set in at a certain point. A sense of how long will this possibly go on? 38 years. You might have noticed my emphasis at the end of the reading, how it just ends with this statement, and it was the Sabbath. There are things you don't do on the Sabbath. Work, of course, but work is defined in a lot of different ways. things that you don't do on the Sabbath, especially if you're, say, a rabbi, are things like healing people. So how should this story have gone? The man's been there 38 years, right? He'd probably be there tomorrow, right? Jesus would come in, see this tragic story, and say, "Hey, buddy, I really want to help you. Unfortunately for all of us, it's the Sabbath, so I can't do anything today, but I will stop by here first thing tomorrow before we head out of town, and I will heal you." And they would go back, and then there would be another scene that would be very heroic with Jesus healing the man, right? And then they'd move on. You might ask yourself, in the story that we have today, where's the fire, right? This is this kind of chronic condition that this man has. Where's the fire? Where is the fire? Here's another thing that Jesus doesn't do. He doesn't see the man, hoist him up on his shoulders in a fireman carry, and dash into the water. Do you know why? It would take too long. Jesus meets this man and says, "This is unacceptable and cannot wait another minute. Get up and walk. Take your mat." And the man gets up, takes his mat, and walks. Jesus is on fire. This is unacceptable that he has been unable to walk for 38 years. This cannot wait another minute. I know it's the Sabbath, but this must stop right now. How many things in your life, your neighborhood, your work, your community, your nation, your world have been going on for 38 years? That'll probably still be there tomorrow, right? Where's the fire? Where's the fire? This story to me is fascinating on a number of levels. Jesus, in many ways, is trying to point out to the religious authorities that the Sabbath is about healing and wholeness. But I think there is something far more urgent in the text this morning. That Jesus is challenging us to consider the things that seem too huge, the things that seem impossible, the things that make us afraid or weary before we even start. That all of those things, that we should rekindle that fire in our gut that says, not a minute more is this acceptable. Not a minute more. I think the challenge from this text for this week is that we might find our fire and to recognize in this season of resurrection that Christ does the impossible and what on its face may seem ludicrous, and that Christ's people should have the confidence that that work continues to this day. So as you bump into the wrongs, the brokenness, and the injustices in your life and world in this week, find that fire. Trust that Christ works in you, that new life will come where it's least expected. Amen.